Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm doing sort of a different kind of video. I'm experimenting with different videos, right? And I want to talk about what I watched this month because obviously I watch a lot of movies, new, old, whatever. And so I want to talk about the movies that I watched this month because I feel like I watched quite a few movies, but I don't know, maybe to somebody else this isn't a lot, but yeah, I'm going to skip the movies that I talked about that I already reviewed on this channel, like Possum and the Snowtown Murders. So I'm just going to talk about these in the order that I watched them. I don't have a specific theme or anything, so these really cover a wide range of movies, so if you're interested, then stick around. The first movie that I watched was The Skin I Live In. I've heard about this movie, and of course I saw it, I think, on Tubi, and I was like, of course I'm gonna watch this. Thank you, Tubi. It's a 2011 film that's considered a horror sci-fi, even though I think it falls more in like the psychological horror type of movie, even though there is kind of a science fiction element. It's not like space science fiction, if that makes sense. So the movie stars Antonio Banderas and Elena Anayana. So this movie's in Spanish. You can find it subtitled, I think, in Spanish and in French. It's directed by Pedro Almodovar. I suck with name pronunciations, especially when there's supposed to be emphasis in a place that doesn't feel natural to me. Apparently, it was adapted from the book called Tarantula, written by, oh no, Thierry Jonquet? I took Spanish in high school, so I don't know about French pronunciation, but I'm assuming it's Thierry Jonquet. But the plot of the movie, Antonio Banderas' character is a plastic surgeon, like an amazing plastic surgeon. And he ends up losing his wife one day because she was in a terrible car accident and just had a lot of burns and stuff. And he ends up losing her to her taking her own life. And they also had a daughter. And the daughter suffered greatly because she saw her mom take her life. We sort of go between the past and the present in this film, so we see that the doctor is sort of watching over this woman who like lives in a room by herself. She's like covered up sometimes, or like most of the time. Essentially, it looks like she is some sort of patient or some sort of like experiment that he's like watching over. And it's hard to talk about the plot without giving away the ending, which I will do spoilers here in a second. So as the doctor is watching over his project, something happens. I won't say what, but I will say, I guess this gives it away in terms of what happens, but trigger warning, there is the R word. His project gets R-worded, and that is when we start to like circle back into how she even got there in the first place, like how he developed this project, because his project has to do with skin. That's why it's The Skin I Live In. It has to do with him like creating this like the suits that the one lady makes in The Incredibles. But he wants to make it a skin version that can withstand anything. And so that's what his sort of scientific goal is. And I will get into the spoilers now really quick, so you can skip ahead. Essentially, we find out that the woman that he is doing the experiment on is actually a man who had R-worded his daughter, and he kidnapped him and decided to forcibly transition him into a woman that makes him look like his wife. Besides the problem with like forcibly transitioning somebody, especially to look like your own wife, your own dead wife, for essaying your daughter. Like, besides the problem with that, it's also just really weird and uncomfortable. That's essentially the spoiler for the movie. That's the big like twist reveal that they do into the movie. I went into the movie knowing the twist, so I wish that I didn't know that. Like, I wish that I didn't know the twist, because I think it would have been a really big surprise partway through the movie, because, like, obviously at first you're like, oh, she needs to escape, but then it seems like she's in love with him, so, like, it's kind of like, you know, Stockholm Syndrome, but also, like, the twists and stuff make all of that in retrospect look really weird. I thought the movie was okay. I thought it was made really well. The only problem that I had with it, and what I have with some other movies on this list that I watch, is just the perception of women. Women are not objects, and that's like the whole thing going on with this movie, is that women are not really active participants in this movie. Like, the doctor's fixation on his wife and his daughter is really weird, and the fact that he would just do what he does in order to, like, try to recreate them is really weird and really not okay. Like, your wife and daughter were people. Alright, movie number 2, Frozen. Not the Disney Frozen. I'm talking about a 2010 film called Frozen. I kept seeing it pop up on either Tubi or somewhere else, and I was like, I can't decide if this is a really good idea for a movie or a really bad one. It stars Shawn Ashmore, Emma Bell, and Kevin Zegers, and it was directed by Adam Green. So this movie is supposed to be sort of a, like, thriller, almost nature horror type thing, because the whole thing is that these teens, this isn't really a surprise, this is the plot, so it's not really a spoiler, but they get stuck on one of those ski lifts. So, they're going up the mountain, and of course it feels kind of the way Final Destination feels, which I want to say that at least one or two of them is also in Final Destination, or one of the movies, but it feels the way that Final Destination feels, in that, like, you know that they're gonna get stuck up there, so everything leading up to it is like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. So when they say things like, oh, I'm just gonna leave my phone here, or, oh, well, like, we'll just pay them and we'll just go up really quick, or, oh, I'm not gonna bring this, or it's not gonna take us that long, like, graphic scenes in it, so just trigger warning for, like, just violence and stuff. I was laughing during a lot of the graphic scenes simply because they were somewhat ridiculous, but also, like, okay, I was not expecting that. So yeah, there's not really much to say about it. It's not really so much plot driven as much as it's driven by, like, the circumstances. So it's all about, like, watching them try to survive and thinking they are idiots. It is definitely, like, even though it was made in 2010, it feels of the 2000s, especially with the actors and actress that are in it. Very much so. I had a good laugh. The next movie is the 2015 film Martyrs. Now, part of the reason that I watched this movie is because there's a 2008 French version, and I wanted to sort of compare the two, and I do this a couple times on this list, but I wanted to compare the two because that one just didn't look as good as the 2008 version, but essentially it's like a psychological horror. It says that it's a horror mystery. Now, there's some interesting elements in this film. I definitely think it falls more into, like, psychological horror, even though it does have some, like, traditional horror elements. Also, for reference, this was directed by Michael and Kevin Getz. It stars, oh my gosh, Troyan? I don't know how to say her name, but she, I think, is in Pretty Little Liars. Belisario and Bailey Noble. It also has Kate Burton in it, which is, like, fun because, I don't know, just Kate Burton. She always plays, like, the worst people. So the story follows the two main girls. One of them was abused as a child, and they both end up at the same orphanage, and they just sort of grow a friendship, and then into their adulthood, one of them, the one who was abused, wants to take revenge against the family or the people who abused her. Now, part of what's going on with this film is that the abuse was intense abuse, and it wasn't necessarily like the kind of traditional abuse that we think of, and she talks about it, and she's haunted by that abuse. And part of what is going on with this film is that the friend sort of questions whether or not she believes what her friend is talking about. Like, she's not really sure if the abuse, not so much that it wasn't real, but like the specifics of the abuse don't seem real. I'm gonna get into spoilers here because the first part of the film is sort of about the abuse and whether or not she believes it, until she sees it. And then she sort of gets kidnapped by the people who do the abuse because it's like an organization, and she ends up getting abused as well. Now, in this film, the abuse is put on both of the girls and some other people. Whereas in the 2008 version, the abused friend dies, and the friend from the orphanage is the new person who's getting abused. So it's a little bit different. One thing I will say about the 2015 version of this movie is that people were talking about how brutal it was and how graphic it was. And there are some graphic scenes, but the color grading and the way that it's shot reads a little cheap to me. And I don't know if that's of its time because it was from 2015 or not, but I feel like the 2008 version just was like grittier. It had more of like just a realness to it. It felt very realistic, whereas this one just didn't feel as much. I also think the 2008 version was just more graphic in a different way. Yeah, I just think it was graphic in a very different way, and I liked that better. So the next film that I watched was Repulsion, the 1965 film. The film is by Roman Polanski, and we all know the issues with this guy. Either way, this film is about a woman. She lives with her sister in an apartment, and her sister decides to go on like a little vacation with her boyfriend, and so this woman is left in the apartment by herself for like a week. So she ends up spiraling, sort of has like different, visions and things like that, not really understanding or knowing what's real. Part of the reason it's called Repulsion, I think, is because it's the woman herself, she's like afraid of men, like she has a phobia, which I feel like I wouldn't have guessed by watching the movie. Like, if I didn't know that information, I would just think that she just doesn't like men, and that she has more so like agoraphobia, which is like a fear of like wide open spaces and stuff. So like, because she does spend like most of her time in the apartment, or most of the movie in the apartment. Trigger warning just for like SA or like mentions of SA. It very much seems like this woman was traumatized probably in her childhood based on like her room and stuff. There's a lot of like symbolism type of stuff in this film. Something that sort of bothers me, and again, this is another thing that's gonna pop up later for some other films, but one thing that bothers me a little bit about films like this is women spiraling or having some sort of psychotic break written by men. I'm just tired of that. I'm tired of women being written by men as like people who are just under duress psychologically all the time. It just bothers me. I don't care what time period it's from, it just bothers me, especially like writing the inside of a woman's head from a man. The next film is The Afflicted. It is a 2011 film. It's considered a horror type mystery. I think, again, it falls more in like drama thriller sort of space. It was directed by Jason Stoddard. and I believe it's like based on a true story, or like based on like something similar that happened. I think this film was like very low budget, which I'm like fine with a low budget film. But the issues that it was tackling and the way that it was tackling them, not my favorite. Essentially, it's about a family. The mother sort of goes off the deep end in a religious way and starts abusing her children in, again, just some crazy and heinous ways. Yeah, I would say just like trigger warning for like SA, violence, etc. Yeah, I don't know. I just was really bored by the film. I know that sounds bad because it was literally about like abuse, but yeah, I just found the film to not be like super interesting. That sort of brings me to the next film. It's a 2021 film called The Nest. This stars a woman named Sarah Navratil, Dee Wallace, Kevin Patrick Murphy, and Maple Suttles. This is another one that, again, is sort of like lower budget. And again, I'm fine with lower budget movies. It's sort of like a horror type of film. It also was directed by James Suttles, so I'm assuming that, like, he put his daughter in there for a reason. At a garage sale, this woman ends up buying a teddy bear for her daughter, which, by the way, if you see the teddy bear, its eyes are way too big. I'd be like, that's an ugly bear. I'm sorry. Anyway, she buys this bear for her daughter, and turns out there's some sort of, like, parasitic entity within it that kind of has a bug-like sort of way about it. Goes on sort of infecting the people around her. And the mother has to kind of like find out a way to stop it, or like figure out what's going on with it. Again, this was another film that like was just not super interesting. Like the concept, like I love a good like we gotta figure out that we're infected before it gets too bad type of film, but this one really just like it just kind of lost me partway through. It felt like it could have been a short film instead of a whole movie. There's another one on this list that sort of felt that way as well, and I was like, The next one's another, like, horror type film. If you didn't know, I'm really into, like, horror, mystery, thriller type of stuff. Anyway, I finally got around to watching It Follows. I've been really wanting to watch this film for a while now because I've heard so many good things about it, and I understand why. This was one of the few films that I actually like starred on my list as like, ooh, this was actually really good, because there are a lot of I go through a lot of bad movies, okay? But it's a 2014 horror mystery thriller type of film. It stars Micah Monroe. The film follows a girl after she has a sexual encounter with her boyfriend at the time, or like guy that she's dating, when he sort of like tells her that there's this thing that is going to be following her, trying to hurt her. It's some sort of entity, and you pass it on sexually. And of course, like, the concept in itself is like really interesting. There's just a lot of like foreboding music. I love the vibes of this film. I loved the score of this film. It was just like so, like, it had sort of like a techno sort of vibe. Anyway, I loved the vibes of this film. I love the concept of this film, and I love the way that they executed it. I just think the horror in this film did really well. I do think that, like, there's something to be said about the fact that it's passed on sexually. Not sure what that's getting at. Obviously, I think a lot of people saw this and they were like, it's a metaphor for STDs. Maybe. Whether it is or isn't, I don't really care. I think it was just made really well. Obviously, the idea of, like, passing on something terrible through your sexual encounters and then having it follow you everywhere, like, the thing that gets me about that is that, like, there's a lot of, like, medication and antibiotics for a lot of, like, STDs out there, so, like, even though, you know, you should be safe and stuff in your encounters, like, I don't know if this necessarily specifies that, like, you would be protected if you use protection. They never really addressed that. element of like the metaphor. So I don't know. I really liked the film. I thought it was a really interesting and original concept, and again, the score, amazing. The next film is Ring, or like The Ring. It's the 1998 Japanese one. I really wanted to watch this one again because I sort of wanted to compare it to The Ring starring Naomi Watts. The film was directed by Hideo Nakata. Whenever there's like a horror film that's been remade for like American audiences from like Japanese horror, I always want to watch like the original like Japanese version because I feel like they do horror really well and they really have a good grasp of things that are terrifying, or even just like I saw, because of course I had to get on Letterboxd to see like what other people were thinking about this film, and I saw I think a couple of reviews that were talking about how like this film doesn't have like essentially enough horror or enough jump scares or whatever, and like I like horror that's like more foreboding, that it very much has this feeling of like suspense and anticipation rather than just jumping out at me. Like, this was another film that I put a star next to because I was like, this was just so good. I really want to watch the other films in relation to this because I do believe that there is like more sequels that are related. So yeah, I'd love to see what they do in some of the other ones because there were definitely some like loose ends that were not necessarily tied up at the end. The next film I simply watched because it has Matthew Lillard in it. It is the 1998 film The Curve. It's sort of a thriller mystery type of film. It was directed by Dan Rosen. It's about these college kids who hear that like if your college roommate takes their own life, then you will get an automatic 4.0 for the year or the semester. So 2 out of the 3 roommates decide to plan and stage the taking of the life of their other roommate, you know, so they can get a 4.0 and they can like, I don't know, move up in the world. Either way, there's a lot of like psychological elements to it. Matthew Lillard is just being insane like he always is. It's very much like reminiscent of Scream. Like it very much has that same like we don't really know who's telling the truth. There's lots of twists and turns, stuff we don't know, things that like, you know, pop up that we don't want to. Yeah, there's just a lot going on with this film, and it's just a fun watch. I won't say that it's like a good movie. Like the plot, like the idea in itself is kind of ridiculous, but also like I could see some college guys who are demented doing something like this. So yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was fun. If you like Matthew Lillard. The next one I watched was The Belko Experiment. It's a 2016 film. On Google, they call it a horror action movie. I guess it kind of is. It's definitely one of those, like, the concept is there, but the execution is not quite. It was directed by Greg McLean. So it stars John Gallagher Jr., but, like, it's also sort of an ensemble type thing because there's a lot of different people in this film. The concept is that this corporate office gets locked down by an organization of some sort, pretty much doing a human experiment, telling them to kill their coworkers and just sort of a survival type of experiment. And like it very much is. I don't know if there's supposed to be some sort of underlying metaphor about like corporate America and like our ability to just sort of do anything for a bag, but the film definitely had me screaming at different moments because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. Oh my gosh, what are they doing? You guys are idiots. It's definitely an interesting watch. Again, the concept is there. I just don't know if the execution was quite right. Like, it was definitely on the line for me. So I've heard a lot of people say that they really like this movie, or they really liked it upon the second watch. And I've seen some other people be like, this was dumb. So I'm kind of in between. I definitely think there were some things that weren't done quite right, but there were other things where it was like, okay, I see you. You thought of some stuff. The next one was another Tubi find. It's called The Monster Project. It is a 2017 sort of like horror thriller type of movie. It is a found footage type of movie as well. It stars Toby Hemingway and Justin Bruing, and it was directed by Victor Matthew. Essentially, these amateur type filmmakers want to make a film about real monsters. So they sort of put out like a Craigslist type of ad looking for people who claim to be real monsters, and they're going to interview them and, you know, try to create like this little documentary. And of course they decide to do it in like the creepiest way possible. They're doing it at like this abandoned mansion where it's just like big and dark and creepy. And as they're doing it, there's a lot of like twists and turns of like, are these people actually like monsters? Like, are they actually a vampire? Are they actually like a skinwalker or something? Like, you know, are these people real? There's, you know, some twists in there of like when we find out information. But yeah, it was one of those like, it wasn't awful, but it definitely wasn't good. Either way, it's just one of those like fun little found footage horror movies. So like, if you like that genre, for one, I have like a whole video about found footage films, but also if you really like it, then you might like this movie because there are some like, you know, horror elements to it. It's not just them interviewing people. The next film is one that, again, I've heard a lot of good things about, and I actually started on my list as well because it just, I was like, yes, good. It's the 2005 film Hard Candy. It was directed by David Slade. It stars Patrick Wilson and Elliot Page. So this is one of those twist type of films where the twist is pretty early. So I will tell you like what it's generally about, and then I will get into spoilers of the twist essentially. Pretty much the plot is that this older man is meeting this young girl. Like, she's clearly a young teen girl, like barely hit puberty. Clearly this man is also like a predator. And it seems like they are sort of hitting it off pretty well, and like I think we can all recognize why that is a dangerous situation. You know, she's like clearly very into him, and like obviously as an adult you can't sit there and be like, oh well, she's like coming on to him, da da da. If a child comes on to you, you tell them to back it up, you know? Like, it's your job as the adult to like be the adult. Like, she wants to like see his house pretty much, and that's when he's like, okay, I'll take you back to my house. Also, he's a photographer, so it's very much like in the line of predatory things. Like, it's all lining up. Now for the spoilers. Essentially the twist is that she wants to take revenge on him. She thinks that he is a predator and she wants him to pay for that. So she ties him up, and she, you know, is telling him, I'm gonna cut your balls off because you're a predator. And so she sort of like is trying to find out more information about him as she goes about like looking through his house, trying to find his CP, you know, all that kind of stuff. And the ending is really nice. It's very satisfying and I love it. So it was one of the few times I've been satisfied by an ending. This movie was made very well. There are just like some graphic scenes, but for the most part there's nothing too bad in this film. But yeah, it just a great watch. I love like a psychological sort of moment like that, where they're just playing mind games the whole time. So yeah, I liked it. I'm glad that I didn't know quite what the twist was going in, so when the twist came, I was very satisfied. The next one is another popular movie that you may know about. It's Silent Hill. Of course, I was like 7 or 8 when this came out, so like don't judge me for having not seen it yet. But it's the 2006 film. Of course, it's like a horror mystery based on the game. It was directed by Christoph Gans, and it stars Radha Mitchell and Jodelle Ferland. This film watched like a video game, and I loved it. I am sure that there are like very split opinions, because when you start making video games into movies, it really does. It's like making a book into a movie. You've got people who absolutely hate to see their favorite piece of media put into a film, and then there are other people who absolutely love it. Now, I haven't personally played the Silent Hill games, I just knew what they were about, so going into it, obviously, I can't say to like the accuracy or to like, you know, how much of the plot is the same. I can't tell you that. As much as I love watching people play video games, I just didn't have the time to actually watch it before I watched the film. Either way, I just thought it was really good. Like, I love a good, like, religious horror moment when it's like this, when it's like a culty religious horror and not just like she's possessed by the devil kind of thing. Essentially, the film follows a woman who adopted a little girl, and this little girl is having nightmares, having visions, and she talks about Silent Hill. And so the mom does some research, and she decides to take her back to Silent Hill in order to sort of grapple with these demons, right? Turns out Silent Hill is like in a whole other universe. Like, the place itself exists, but there's also like another universe, another parallel universe that exists of Silent Hill, that you can only enter under certain circumstances. So her and her daughter end up entering, as well as like a local police officer, whereas the father, played by Sean Bean, which, Sean Bean or Sean Barn, he goes looking for his wife and daughter, obviously, but he doesn't have access to that parallel universe. I sort of already like spoiled a little bit of it, but essentially, spoilers, like the little girl is like kind of possessed, I guess, by like the soul of a little girl who was wronged as a child by these like churchy cult type people, and so she's sort of put this almost curse over the town to like trap the townspeople in this like demonic sort of world. This movie, again, I think it really does watch like a video game. It really reminded me of how I felt when I read the Legend series. The Legend series was written by Marie Lu, and she did a lot of work on video games, and when I first read that as a kid, because I loved those books, and I felt like they read like a video game. And this is another one of those times where I was like, ooh, it feels like a video game. But the atmosphere, the way that they transition between scenes, the acting, especially when she's like running places, and like she runs between very far away places, and she just like appears there and she's running at full speed from like afar, but whenever she's trying to run away from something itself, it's like she cannot get fast enough. It really feels the way that it feels to play a video game when you run. Next one is another like little psychological weirdness. It's called Nancy. It's a 2018 film. It was directed by Christina Cho, and it stars Andrea Riseborough, J. Smith Cameron, and Steve Buscemi. This film is pretty interesting. It's definitely like more of a character-driven type of film. I know some people were saying that they didn't like Possum because it was not story-driven, it's like more character-driven. So if you are not into like more psychological looks at a specific person, you might not like this film as much. However, there is like sort of a mystery element of it. The plot is that Nancy, this woman, after her mother passes away, she finds that this couple who had been searching for their missing daughter for like 30 years, it had like come up on an anniversary, so they were like, you know, showing it on the news, and she realizes that she kind of looks like the age progression of their daughter, and so she begins to question and investigate. So she, you know, tries to meet these people and everything, and of course the question is whether or not she actually is, because this woman is also sort of a liar. She tells a lot of lies. So yeah, definitely interesting. I will say, trigger warning for anyone who hates bad wigs. The hair, her hair, there's no way that was her real hair. They did not do a very good job with the wig. I understand they wanted her to look crusty, musty, dusty, but like, it looked like a mop. Either way, I did really like this film. I wouldn't put it on like my liked list, because I didn't like it that much, but I did like, you know, the mystery element of it, like the when are we gonna know? The next film is a 2008 film. I mostly watched it because Ezra Miller is in a lot of weird films. And a lot of films that are actually kind of similar. This reminded me very much of We Need to Talk About Kevin, but if he was younger. It is called After School. Like I said, Ezra Miller is in it, as well as Jeremy Allen White. Of course, he showed up in this film. So Ezra Miller's character essentially goes to a prep school, and he's just kind of weird and an outcast. I'm referring to their character. So their character, he is sort of an outcast amongst the group of students, but sort of kind of just weird. But he has a roommate, and he kind of like witnesses there's like drug and alcohol use within the school. There are these twins at school who end up passing away, and he is there when it happens, and he also catches it on film. There's sort of like a found footage element to this film, because I think the after school like title of it has to do with them having to have an after school activity that they have to join, and he decides to join like the like video club or something. Either way, it's very much about like the psychological toll that this takes on like their character, even though the school does sort of try to help him, because like obviously being there when two people who are very well known in your school pass away violently in front of you, that would be hard to deal with mentally and emotionally, and they sort of try to help him, but like not really. Yeah, it definitely was one of those We Need to Talk About Kevin type of films, but I just don't know what I was supposed to gather by the end, other than like, he's mentally disturbed, but no one is trying to help. The next one was a fun Tubi watch because I just had to. It is a 2003 film called Defending Our Kids, the Julie Posey story. Now, of course, this was based on like real life events. I'm mostly just making fun of the way that they portrayed it. It very much felt like a Lifetime type of movie. It stars Annie Potts. It is the classic story of they buy their daughter a computer of her own, and she gets groomed. However, in this story, she finds out really early, and the mom takes over, so it's very Lifetime-esque. The mom takes over as the main character, and she is, like, hunting pedos online. That is what she decides is her new job, along with the police. So she, like, goes in tandem with the police to hunt these guys down, catch some predators. Like, she was Chris Hansen before Chris Hansen. It was a fun little watch if you're into like Lifetime style, you know, movies, but yeah, it was just like, again, a little fun like watch. It was kind of ridiculous, but also like I respect the story. Like I can respect that, like, yeah, go mom, like go get those pedos, like put them in jail. The next one was another one that I starred, and I'm really glad that I had seen this one like recommended multiple times, and I finally sat down to watch it, but it is Gonjiam, the Haunted Asylum. It's a 2018 horror film. It is like a found footage type of film. I want to say that it's on my Letterboxd list of found footage films, but really well made. I was not expecting it to be so good because I don't know, sometimes I just get tired of watching found footage films. Like, some of them just end up looking the same, but I think that the ending and the horror was done really well. It was directed by Jung Bum-shik, and of course it's in Korean. This was another sort of ensemble cast, but a group of like horror enthusiast types of people who do like a little web series go to Gonjiam Haunted Asylum to document their experience there, and also there's like a door that nobody can open, or when people try to open it, they suffer some kind of consequences. And so yeah, some neat little like twists and turns. Again, just some good like I think, you know, we sort of have like the little characters of like the timid one, the one who's like, you know, trying to boss everyone around, the one who's making jokes, sort of thing. So they definitely have like all the different characters. Yeah, I think it was really good. Again, I think the horror was original. I think like the scares, especially towards the end, were just done really well. And I think it was like fairly realistic of the way that like a lot of sort of web series or like YouTube type of horror is nowadays. I feel like sometimes when we get like internet related horror, or like anything that's sort of supposed to be like a modern thing that we do, when it's fictionalized, it doesn't always look very realistic or feel realistic. And I think this one did a very good job of making it feel like it was something that could really happen, or that would really happen, with people who were, you know, trying to be internet famous. The next one is a 2016 sort of like horror, thriller, mystery type of film. It's called I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. Now, this one seemed pretty obvious that it was like based on a book or a story by the same name. It was directed by Oz Perkins. Essentially, it follows a hospice care nurse who goes to live with her next patient, and it's just kind of a creepy house, you know? Her patient was also like a novelist or a writer of like horror stories, and the nurse is sort of like skittish, like she just is not into horror, like she's scared by it. This was such a disappointment. I was like really excited to watch this film, and this is another film that could have been a short story. Like it should have been a short story. It should have been a short film. There just was not enough plot to make it into a whole film. Like, I don't know if I could remember anything that happened in the middle. Yeah, I hate when I don't like a movie, but there was just too much narration. It was just really slow, and not in like a, oh, I'm really thinking about this kind of way. I was like, okay, let's go. Like, show me something. The last two are pretty popular films that, again, I didn't see when they came out, so don't be mad at me. So the next one is Call Me By Your Name. It's the 2017 romance drama coming of age story adapted from the book. It was directed by Luca Guadagnino. Oh my god. I hate that I can't pronounce people's names! Anyway, it stars Timothy Chalamet and Armie Hammer. It was probably one of Timothy Chalamet's breakout roles. Essentially, summer of '83 in Italy, a sort of like student, I guess, of a professor comes to his little house during the summer to work on their academic work. And while the student is staying there, he sort of forms this relationship with the son. Anyway, I was kind of uncomfortable. Like, I'm not saying that he's like a predator, because I don't think that he was like trying to prey on Elio, but it definitely was one of those things where, like, I don't know, maybe it's a cultural thing that in some cultures it's okay to have like romantic relationships with people who are like significantly younger than you, but maybe on the line of being like an adult, because Elio's supposed to be 17 and Oliver, the student, is supposed to be 24. I don't know. I don't think this story was for me. Like, I loved the vibes, love a good, like, Italy, cutesy, you know, cottagecore vibe, but I just don't think the story was for me. I'm not a gay man. But yeah, there were just parts of it that made me really uncomfortable, and not even, like, the peach part. Like, I just mean the parts, especially towards the beginning. There's a part where they are talking about the signs that Oliver was trying to hint to Elio that he was into him. And it made me really uncomfortable when he said that, you know, that time that we were playing volleyball and I came and I like tried to touch you and you like really backed away. I assumed that you didn't like me after that because you were like so like appalled by it. And I'm like, he's like, it made me feel like I molested you. And like they laugh about it, but I'm like, a lot of things that people, especially neurotypicals, think are like romantic or okay when you are into someone are not okay when you are not. Like, yes, the way that he touched him was not okay. Like, you should not touch people that way, especially if they don't seem to want to be touched that way, you know? Also, there's a part at the end where the dad, which I now just discovered, is not Joaquin Phoenix. I thought that was Joaquin Phoenix the whole time. It is a guy named Michael Stuhlbarg. Sorry for the tangent. Anyway, there's a monologue that he does at the end that I just thought was really beautiful. I really liked it. Like, that was one of the only parts where I was like, wow, this is really good. Okay, the final one, I have a feeling this video is going to be really long. The final one was Black Swan. I have been meaning to watch this for a really long time. I've heard a lot of things about it, and it actually ended up being one of my starred movies. I will list them all here at the end, but it's a 2010, it's called a horror mystery. I think it's really just a psychological thriller. There's not actual like horror moments in it, in my opinion. Anyway, it stars Natalie Portman. She's a ballerina and she wants to be the Swan Queen in the Swan Lake Ballet. It was directed by Darren Aronofsky. This movie is pretty much just about like the psychological turmoil it can take on someone who is both obsessed with perfectionism but also in an industry that is particularly competitive. If you know anything about dance, you know that it's it's an extremely competitive environment all of the time, and if you are not comfortable with yourself, then you may end up in situations like this. Now, I loved what was going on with the costuming, the set design. I loved a lot of the horror elements, a lot of the sort of psychological, like, fake outs that they had, sort of. I really liked that. The problem that I have is just that it was written by men again. I don't know, like, it makes me uncomfortable that so much of the psychological thriller and horror genre is filled with talking about women being mentally ill. Because to me, and I guess this might be a spoiler, I don't know, but to me, this story was about a girl who was spiraling, not just because of the psychological pressure that, you know, finally getting to your dream spot and having to feel like everyone is after you and hates you and that you're not good enough. I think she also was spiraling because she was anorexic. Like, she was very clearly not well. And when you don't have the nutrients it needs when you don't have the nutrients your body needs to function, your brain doesn't function either. Like, people who cut out carbs, just so you know this, in case you didn't know, carbs make your brain work. So when people go on no-carb diets, they seem like they're kind of crazy. Like, they start doing crazy junk. And it's because their brain can't function because they're not eating carbs. Needless to say, I liked this film. I really did. It just sucks that that is always the case. I just feel like I don't see very many psychological thrillers or like ones that are more dramatic than they are action. I think of movies like Limitless where like the psychological element has to do with like a sci-fi element as well. Like, they're not dealing with mental health issues because they are mentally unwell, where it just seems like a lot of these women are just mentally unwell. And I don't know, it gives me a weird feeling inside when I know that a story that's written from a woman's perspective, specifically about her psychological state of mind, is written by a man. Like, it's not inherently bad. It doesn't make it bad. Again, this was on my list of really good movies that I watched this month. So, like, it's no hate, okay? I don't hate when men write, okay? It's not that men can't write women. It's just that I feel like a lot of the times women are portrayed and have been portrayed throughout history as, like, overreacting or delusional or deranged. When a lot of us deal with psychological issues because we are not built for the world that has been created for us. That was my only qualm with this film. Otherwise, I loved it. I loved everything leading up to it. I loved the ending. It was really good. Those are all the films I watched this month besides the ones I reviewed, but my favorites for this month were It Follows, Ring, Hard Candy, Silent Hill, Gonjiam, and Black Swan. So let me know if you guys liked this video. I may do one every few months just because, I got a lot of videos planned for each month, so, when I get to it, I'll get to it. But let me know if you liked this kind of video, and maybe I'll try to include it sooner rather than later. But yeah, I'm really excited for the following weeks because, again, I have a big project that I'm working on, and I hope you guys like it. Let me know what you guys think down below, but that's all I have for you, so I'll see you in the next one.